Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Johnston, pastor of Pastoral Care here at Chase Oaks, and I'm joined by Lee Tran, who is our pastor of counseling. We are so glad you are here. If you enjoy this video, please share it with someone who may need to see it and take a second to like and subscribe. It really does help. All right, let's dive in. Hi, Lee.
Hey, what's up, Matt? Glad to be here. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. I was telling someone the other day that we have these conversations pretty regularly, and this is just a fun way to hit record and make
Yeah,
it official.
yeah, very,
So
yeah. Looking
yeah,
forward to it.
looking forward to it. I mentioned at the top that you are the pastor of counseling, but you are also a licensed professional counselor supervisor, or LPC-S. Can you
Correct.
take a second? Can you take a second and explain what does LPC-S mean? What is that?
Yeah, licensed professional counselor is just the licensure that the state of Texas uses, the designation, for people who are allowed to do psychotherapy, counseling, that kind of thing. Generally, in the mental health field, there's three major licensure buckets. You've got LPCs, counselors like myself. You've got psychologists who can do some different kind of testing that counselors can't do. And then you got psychiatrists like MDs who can prescribe medication. So I fall in the field of doing mostly talk therapy, family therapy, marriage therapy, that kind of thing. The supervisor designation just means that I'm permitted to supervise interns and associates as they get their hours for, just learning and developing in their career early on, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So in short, you're a boss.
in short, I've got more responsibility and liability. That's really what it means. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, no better person then to join us and be a part of this video. So with you being a mental health care professional, and with the holidays rapidly approaching,
Yes.
we thought it was a great opportunity for us to put together this resource, you and I, to help resource folks that are going into this holiday season, maybe not really all that excited, or maybe the excitement is mixed with other not so great feelings because there's some anticipation of difficult conversations or difficult family interactions, or maybe there's concern of this season being difficult because of recent loss or grief of some kind. And so we thought, hey, let's collect some questions from real life people who are maybe in that situation and would love to ask questions of a therapist, and I think also helpfully a pastor, to shed some light into some of these circumstances that may be causing some of these mixed feelings moving into the holiday season. So that's really the purpose of this video. Lee, as a pastor and an LPC-S, hosted by me. So Lee, you are credentialed, you are highly educated in this, and I know how to talk into a microphone. So, what a great combination.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've been to a Thanksgiving dinner or two yourself, and so you probably can relate with some of the tension. So I'd love to be able to contextualize this in just some real life difficulties and tensions that everyone feels, myself included. So I'll add some of the maybe mental health dynamics to it, but this is not an uncommon question. Everyone experiences it. And I mean, you're generally talking about in the general frame of what we're bringing up here is the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas. It really just traditionally is intended to be kind of a joyful time when you can get together with family and so forth. But the reality is there's a lot of people that's just not the case for, and that's not often talked about, So we're going to make some space, and I hope that we can talk through a lot of the common things that people are experiencing that, again, we just probably don't have a lot of space to really kind of air out and kind of talk through. So I'm really looking forward. I think it's a much needed topic. So yeah, let's unpack it. There's probably a lot of different questions. I've heard a wide range of different situations. So yeah, break it down for me. What do you want to start with here?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that this is not something that is really a unique thing. This is an extremely common feeling of going into the holiday season. And I think the questions that we got, and the questions we'll be discussing, I think represent that diversity that you mentioned. We'll just hit it. So I put these questions together, and I'll just read these, and then we'll hear from you, and maybe kick them around if I have a follow-up question or two. But we'll just hopefully go through this and again, as people hear these questions, they think, oh yeah, I would love to know that. So that's what we're gonna dive in. So we're gonna start. This one has to do with the particular kind of family dynamic. Okay, so this first question is, this person writes, this is the first holiday season our larger family will be together in a couple of years, and I expect there to be tension and division over hot button topics like politics, vaccines, masks, etc. How in the world will we not kill each other?
Oh man, that's like every family, I bet. Yeah, and there's a good point in the question, because it's been probably a couple of years for a lot of people. I mean, there's probably a reason for everyone to skip out last year because of COVID. But with numbers where they are, there's a lot of people probably getting together, and so it's been a minute, right, since some of these families have gathered together. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it in my head. I mean, probably there's just no way around it. I mean, this is going to be awkward, and so my first initial gut reaction was, man, just go for it and just make it super awkward, right? Let's just come wearing maybe a Trump face mask and like a let's go Brandon t-shirt or something like that, and just go all in and just make it super awkward. Just go for it, right?
Just detonate the bomb right away.
Right. So I mean, but honestly, there's just so much that probably is going to be going on in that space where I definitely think it would be helpful to prepare mentally, emotionally before then. I know myself as well. This is applicable to me. I'm going to have to deal with this issue as well in different contexts with family getting together. So, I think the way I would describe it to a client who has this issue, tension with politics, vaccines, strained relationships, dating relationships that maybe extended family don't really care for or appreciate, that kind of thing. There's a wide range. And so let me just go bigger picture here for a second and just say whatever the issue is, whether it's vaccines, politics, who is in a relationship with who, those kinds of things, you've got a few options here. And I think the best way I can kind of frame it is if you think about how aggressive you want to be or how lenient you want to be, there are three strategies I typically suggest for people. Okay, first strategy is what I call the detach strategy. Okay, which is create as much space and distance as you possibly can. That would mean potentially, that could be as far as, hey, maybe don't show up for some of these things if you think it's going to be that contentious, where it's going to be more damaging for your relationships, and it's just there's just huge open wounds in the family. Then it may be an option to simply say, hey, we're going to just do our own thing. Okay. It could be even a little bit less aggressive to simply say, hey, we're going to show up, but we're only going to show up for like the dinner portion, and we're going to maybe show up for an hour and then duck out pretty quickly after that, just to limit the interaction and make sure we don't have as much exposure time in there. Okay, so that's the detached strategy. The second strategy, I would say, is called a harmonized strategy, which means that basically you're going to go in mentally thinking, okay, I disagree vehemently with the people around me. I have maybe even some sore feelings with the people around me in my family, but we are a family. So we're going to gather together, and you know what? I'm going to buck up. I'm going to put on a smile. I'm going to try really hard to just observe that we have differences. And even if people are going to try to provoke the conversations or try to poke at the bear, so to speak, I'm going to do my very best to make it an intentional effort to show up and put that smile on and try to just get along for the sake of harmony, for the sake of unity in the family. I'm just going to make that a conscientious effort. Hopefully everyone else has maybe the same strategy in mind. But even if not, if someone's going to say, they're going to come after you and say, hey, what do you think about, this certain political bill or whatever like that? You have to be conscious to try to make sure you avoid those landmines entirely and just try to harmonize. The objective in there is harmonizing. The longer you can harmonize, the longer you can stay in that space. That would be the second strategy.
Okay.
The third strategy is going to require a little bit more effort, and it's what I call disrupt. And that means that you're going to maybe even before, during, or after, simply call it the elephant in the room and say, hey, we have differences, and we need to work through those differences. We have to talk about those differences. And I want to, because I want to have a relationship. I want to be able to be at peace with you, mom, dad, or whoever. But maybe not at this time. This is not the best time to do it. So let's set aside those differences and maybe we'll get together before or after and talk through them, but we're going to address them. So that if you do that, that leaves you space in that moment to say, hey, we can put those aside for just a dinner and we'll figure those things out at another time. So that would generally be the strategy that I would recommend, and one that I use personally myself. Just kind of trying to think, okay, what's really realistic here? Can I detach a little bit? Can I harmonize? And where I need to, will I disrupt and kind of push into it? So that's kind of the framework. Does it make sense?
Yes, I think so. So let's name the three of them again.
Yep.
First one, where you either don't show up or you show up for only certain portions, was
detach.
Detach.
Yep. That's creating some space.
Create some space with some boundaries right there. Then number two is the harmony.
Harmonize. Yep.
Harmonize.
Yep.
And that's where it just put a smile on and just get through the dinner.
Yeah. It doesn't have to mean authentic reconciliation or unity. It just means that we're going to try and get along right now.
We're just going to do our best to get along, get through this. Don't take the bait. Don't offer bait. We're just going to, great pie.
Have some turkey.
Yep.
Have some stuffing.
That kind of thing. And then the third one was diffuse. I get that right?
Disrupt.
Disrupt.
That means
opposite of diffuse.
Yeah. No, I know if you kind of think about it, it's kind of the opposite of harmonize. It's like we're not going to just pretend we're going to everything's gay. It's actually calling it out and saying, hey, we have issues that we need to work out. I want to work it out, and we're going to disrupt the relationship a little bit by having conflict. We're going to isolate that conflict to other periods of time, like before or after that family meeting.
And it would seem like that the disrupt approach would work if the tension has already been identified or experienced, right? So if someone's coming back to the family and they think, oh, I'm going to be thinking one way or having a certain opinion and I'm going to shock them, there would need to be some sort of other kind of conversation leading into how you said, like, hey, we're going to kind of set aside our differences. If the family doesn't know that those differences exist, then there's an extra conversation that would need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming if the family at large doesn't know that differences exist, you can get away with harmonize. You can go low undercover and just simply, hey, show up, and no one knows. You don't need to bring it up like, hey, I have a very different stance than you on this issue, right?
Okay. And I think that might be important for some to hear, that for the sake of the general well-being, that it may be appropriate, given the circumstances, to not raise that up and just say, hey, it's okay to just grin and bear it for one meal. For one afternoon, evening together. That's okay. Have the hard conversation on a different time, at a different time, when maybe that expectation isn't there, or it's not a heightened kind of day. Is that right? Would you say?
For sure. Right? I mean, you kind of think about it the same way. We have, you've heard of some of the principles. If you're going to have a hard conversation, don't do it by text or email. Like you want to have that conversation in person, or at least over the phone, to where it's just you and the other person. You can really talk it through. Definitely don't have the conversation over Facebook or social media. It's same kind of principle here. You don't want to have that conversation at a large family dinner. That's the worst time to air out your differences. Least amount of ability to maintain control over that and stabilize it. And so, if it's not known, then you don't need to bring it up. You can bring it up before or after, later on, but just make that a conscious effort to say, we're going to try and protect that space as much as possible.
Right. Great. Okay. I would venture to say that was helpful. So
hopefully it works for me. So
yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. I think that's always helpful to hear from the therapist that, hey, this is advice I implement in my own life. That's always fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, similar question, but maybe a different angle here, for our next question. What is the best way to handle family gatherings where I cannot avoid the tension of a strained family relationship, especially if it's a parent? I feel like we try to avoid each other during the year, but when there is a whole day of togetherness, quote, togetherness, there is nowhere to go.
Yeah, that's very similar too, right? I mean, instead of it being like maybe topic based on like, hey, differences on, political point of view, this question has more to do with there's a longstanding brokenness or strain in the relationship itself.
Right. A lot more pain there, not just opinion, but actual
Yeah,
relational past and hurt.
for
Um,
sure. For sure. I think this one assumes that all parties, let's say if it's parent and adult child or something like that, that the elephant in the room is known. It's not like, oh, there's it's not oblivious to either party that there's a strain, right? So everyone knows that there is some level of brokenness in the relationship. And so I think in that context, um, I would go a little bit with the disrupt, then to harmonize posture, which means that
okay.
it would be articulating beforehand, like, hey, mom, um, love to be able to get together for Thanksgiving, for you to be able to see the kids, for us all to kind of hang out together. But I know that we have a lot of unfinished business and it's not going to get resolved in the next few weeks. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
Um, but at least for right now, let's acknowledge that we have conversations that need to happen. But we're going to create this time. I would love to be able to spend a couple hours or however long, so we can just be together. And if we can set aside those things, we'll get to them later, but at least right now. So basically you're calling out the elephant in the room and making it known. That way there's no compulsion for any person to say, if we're all happy and we're laughing and we're doing things together, there's not a compulsion in either person to say, hey, but wait, I'm not okay with you, right? I
Mhm.
think the hard part for a lot of people is thinking, if we play family, if we're playing like everything's okay, that we're somehow going to mislead the other person, saying, hey, everything's all right, everything's just, and things are going to get swept under the rugs and everything's going to be okay after that.
Yeah,
I
let
think
them
that's
off.
the reason why people kind of poke at it a little bit more and bring up the tension, because they don't want that to get lost in the strain of the relationship, which is fine. I get that. That makes sense. But if you disrupt beforehand, you're like, hey, we're going to acknowledge that there's issues. That way, when we play nice with each other on Thanksgiving or Christmas, we're not mistaken. It's not like this is going to be swept under the rug. We can come back to it later on, and
Yeah.
everything's fine. That gives you space to be able to just, you can kind of put your arms down a little bit, let your guard down, and just enjoy the moment, kind of thing. That's the way I would kind of approach it.
Okay. And in both of these scenarios, in these two questions, we're saying that there very likely will be some of that proactive conversation to establish, hey, this is here, maybe let's set some expectations and some boundaries going in,
Yeah,
because a person could be going to that family gathering, or into spending that togetherness time with that particular family member, and feeling like they're going to be attacked, or they're going to be approached, or they're going to be baited, or whatever.
right.
And setting that expectation, setting that boundary early and ahead of time seems like it could be really valuable, rather than walking in and then pulling someone over off to the side and having it right there.
For sure. I mean, if you think about it, it's harder to do, and I think the reason why this doesn't happen is it takes a lot of intentionality for someone to bring it up and say, hey, this is the elephant in the room, this is the issue. You have to like call beforehand, or a couple weeks beforehand, and say, hey, this is what it. So you're initiating, you're bringing up the actual issue itself, and saying, hey, this is the way I'd like to handle it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to do that, but if you do that, you basically neutralize a lot of the fuzziness around the actual event itself. Conversely, if you take the easier approach and simply say, okay, we're not going to talk about it, hope for the best, right? Let's hope that everything goes okay. There's a lot of confusion in there, because I guarantee you, your confusion on it, like, I don't know how I'm going to handle it or what's going to come up. They're confused as well, right? They're not sure how you're going to handle it. They're not sure how they're going to handle it, right? And so there's a lot of room for, hey, like, if just the wrong thing gets said, right? If something gets taken out of context, it's going to be okay. Now we're going to talk about it. And then all of a sudden it starts to derail really quick. And so if you think that that's a likely thing and there's a lot of strain, there's a lot of potential for that to happen, then the best bet, even though it's harder to do, is to have the conversation real briefly up front and say, hey, let's put that aside for tonight. I'm going to commit to not, poking things or bringing things up. I'm going to leave that at the door. I'm going to ask you guys to do that too, and then we can enjoy that time together.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Hopefully it feels probably a little easier said than done.
For sure. Yeah.
You said, um, at least the way I heard you say it is that this is the, the mature approach that will help probably advance the relationship to that end that you're hoping for anyway. So
yeah, and to that note, let me just add that, because that is the disrupt posture to actually engage it, which is again the hardest one, but the healthiest one. If it's not possible, I'm going to give kind of a kind of an easy out here for our listeners. I mean, if you think that's going to be really hard to do and you're just not up to, you don't have the emotional bandwidth to even have that conversation, there's still detach option over there, which is, hey, you can still just show up for like 45 minutes, have a meal, sit at the kids' table if you want, or whatever. Like, you do what you need to create that space and get out. And so there's a few different levers in there that you can pull that would be appropriate to help kind of get you through that period of time.
Yeah, and that's great. I appreciate those different options, because it does provide a little bit of a continuum on like where you want to fall. And you may feel that detach is the best thing to do for your own sanity and well-being. Sure. And so like, I can't subject myself to this at this particular moment.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna take the least amount of risk and show up for pie.
Yeah.
And then that's it, because, for whatever reason, that just feels safest to you. And what I'm hearing from you is that's completely appropriate. That's your choice, but you can choose detach or harmonize or disrupt, and it can move.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every situation is different. Everyone's relationship is in different stages. And it may be you're at the stage right now where you just don't have the bandwidth. You've got plenty of other things to worry about. Yeah. There's lots of things this year that has taken our mental bandwidth. So that's not a unnecessarily abnormal or unhealthy posture to take. So I that's why I put it up there, because it's legitimate.
Absolutely. All right. I realized I've got my water. You've got your cool water. I got my grown-up sippy cup here.
Gotta stay hydrated, man.
I'm not talking nearly as much as you, but still get thirsty. All right.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it down to a minimum.
So we're gonna go to our next question, keeping it still kind of with this family dynamic, but a little bit different. This is well, I'll just read it. Here we go. My younger family members and I have been asked to carry on holiday duties like hosting, cooking, etc., but we are frequently met with complaining from our parents about how we do those things. Why is this so hard, and how can we move forward more peacefully?
Yeah. Oh man. I'm trying to envision what this is like.
I'm imagining like, hey, Brittany, can you handle doing the casserole? And, hey, Mike, I'm going to put you in charge of, this special dessert that we always have.
Yeah.
Sweet potato casserole or whatever it is. And then like, what did you do to this? And no, you didn't make it right, and all this kind of stuff. And
yeah, for sure. And I think it would even extend beyond to like, certain, this comes down to traditions, right? Like certain traditions that are highly meaningful for maybe the older generation of, this is the way like we've done things. This has meaning for what our family is, kind of our identity as a family unit. That could be, to decorations, the decor around the house, certain activities that are done during this time. There's a certain rhythm. And when you have a younger generation come in and do things, they may reconceptualize what those things are, and they may not have the same meaning, right? They're like, okay, that wasn't that important to me. Like, it's not critical that we play Monopoly that day or something like that, just because that's what we've done all growing up. Like, I imagine those kinds of things, right? And there's tension there because it doesn't make sense, because there's such a difference and disparity between the meaning behind it. So it can look so different for every family. And on one end, it can look like, okay, the value behind those traditions is overly stated. Or the other end is like, okay, like there are some things that are like really important. And so just, they're part of the family identity. So try to, buck up and do those things. I'm going to just assume right now that there is healthy reasons on both ends, right? Whether healthy reasons for the younger generation, for the older generation, this comes back down to, okay, if all things are equal and there's good reason for everyone to have the values and the meaningfulness behind these things the way they do, this comes back down to, again, using the same structure a little bit. If it's, all right, I'm trying to think about it. If it's me, and I'm thinking I'm going to be doing this every year from this point forward, me and my family are going to be in charge of basically putting up Thanksgiving, Christmas, hosting. This is year after year. I might go for disrupt. I might go for, okay, like mom, dad, mom and mother-in-law, whoever, like, okay, these are things I want us to all be able to be together. But like, I also want to be able to have a voice in saying how these traditions work. Right. And so that might mean like, okay, let's talk about what does Thanksgiving mean and what's really important and how can we make this kind of our own too? Like how can we introduce some of our traditions in that? So that would be a much more lengthy discussion. That is has broader implications, right? So year after year, we have kind of a new reformation of traditions that we're doing going forward. That seems more sustainable and more meaningful for all parties involved, right? Again, that would be the healthiest way, but that would also be the one that would require the most work and the most direct conflict. But again, if the idea here is that you're doing it year after year after year, it may be worth the pull, right? It may be worth the effort to do that. But if it's like, we don't get together all that often, like once every 5 years, we're going to get all the family together and that kind of thing. And so at that point, it's going to be, okay, if you're the younger generation, you may move to harmonize and simply say, hey, whatever mom and dad want, let's just get it done, right? Yeah, I don't really care if it's that way, but because it's really important to mom and dad, let's just do it to get through that season. It's meaningful for them. It's not that big of a deal for us. That's fine, right? So that I would navigate between those two kinds of things, but I think you kind of get the principle behind it. Just it really has to do with as we're talking about it, I think we can kind of sense this. A lot of this has to do with how much unity and how much reconciliation do we absolutely need to have in the larger family in order to be able to pull off a dinner like this, right? And if I can kind of take a side for a second and just kind of talk as a marriage therapist for a second,
please.
My opinion on this is that that disrupt, detach, harmonize thing is probably the best mechanism when you're talking about extended family, like, because you have an option there to simply say, hey, we don't have to reconcile every single thing. We don't have to be aligned and unified on everything. We can be able to function with differences and just kind of be okay and come together at little bits at different times. But when it comes to marriage, and it comes to your most personal relationships, whether it's your spouse or with your children, like your young children, you've got to have those conflicts. You've got to disrupt. You've got to be able to figure out how are we going to reconcile these things, because we are a unit. We need to be unified. We need to be harmonious together, that kind of thing. So as we're kind of talking this through, you can kind of sense when we're talking about the larger context, there are ways to do that, but there's also an out. You don't have to do that because it is a lot of work. I mean, it's just a ton of work with relationships that may not be as frequent or prevalent in your life on a day-to-day basis, kind of thing. Does it make sense?
It does, yeah. And I'm imagining the person who asked this question, that it's probably extended family, not just siblings. So you're kind of entering into that territory where it's like, okay, how important is this? How often does this happen? But if the older generation is asking the younger generation to take over certain traditions or certain responsibilities, I mean, there could be any number of reasons for that. Maybe it's because they can't keep up with it, like age and health, like they can't do it, or it's part of them, passing it on and bringing in the younger generation into the fold and the responsibility of doing it all. But I'm imagining the person asking this is feeling probably a little bit challenged to have that conversation, how you to disrupt and say, okay, let's lay this out. But it's also an opportunity, it sounds like, at the same time, to collaborate, because you're acknowledging, okay, the older generation has a lot of ownership of these things and a lot of nostalgia built in, but is then also asking me to do it. But I'm not just a robot that's just going to do it exactly how you want it. Now, that might happen because I like to brine the turkey the exact same way, or I like to decorate with the exact same taste or the exact same actual items and trinkets that, have already been passed on to me. That might happen. Or it could be, okay, I'm willing to do it, but I'm going to do it in my own way. And like, let's talk about this again, so we can establish expectations up front and build this thing together, this version, 2.0 together, and I'll take ownership for it. But as you let it go, you have to recognize, mom, dad, aunt, uncles, whoever, that you have to recognize you're letting it go. And that part of that is going to be part of that transition. So having that conversation, as you said, recognizing the opportunity to accept the conflict, to accept that opportunity to face it head on, is there. That option is there, but you're also opting to hopefully go about it. You're doing it for a healthy reason. You're not going into conflict just for conflict. But it ultimately, hopefully, results in a more healthy and satisfying end result, which is you making the pie the way that you want to make the pie. Which who doesn't want pie? The way that they like it. That's the whole point.
Pumpkin pie, pecan pie, or apple pie.
100% Lee, literally all the time, apple pie.
Yeah. There you go. Me too.
We are, as we do this, unless you have something else real to add. Do you have something?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, so we're doing Thanksgiving with my mom today, which is, as we're recording this, is about a week and a half before.
Well ahead, man. Yeah. Well prepared. Good for you.
We're traveling and we're going to see my wife's family. But today, so just a few hours from now, I'm going to be eating my first Thanksgiving dinner of the season. And right now, cooling is an apple pie at my house. And I am so looking forward to that, because apple pie all day.
Important question. Ice cream or no?
I enjoy ice cream. It's like, I'll mix it up. I love, the last time I ate apple pie, which was just a couple of weeks ago, had ice cream. But it's not a must-have. It's not something that's a requirement, but I love it. What about you?
I have to have ice cream with it. I will actually not eat the pie if I don't have a scoop of ice cream with it.
You heard it here first, folks. Have to. That's serious business, Lee.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know. It's like the hot cold thing. There's a balance thing. If I feel like I got the pie, I feel like I'm just missing out on something. So that's just me.
And is that apple pie exclusively, or?
I will prefer apple pie. If I had the choice of different pies available to me, I will choose apple pie.
Apple pie. Now, is it, because for me, there can be bad pie. Like, you can buy like the $4 pie at the store. For sure. Is that, or is it all the same to you? It's all.
I think that's the reason why I get the ice cream, because it's a hedge. Because if it's a bad pie, the ice cream really does a good job of just covering that up.
Yes. Yeah, totally right. But man, when you get a good pie and the creaminess of the ice cream,
sure. Yeah,
it is just literal chef's kiss. It's next level.
Bonus here for our listeners, and this is something that we can go a little bit further down. But I wanted to take that last kind of discussion around older generation, younger generation, and that, traditions, and actually even just kind of talk about that if we can. I mean, this is a little bit off trail, but I think this is,
let's do it, man. We got,
especially for like people who are chase oakers who are at our church listening to this potentially, with regard to just our church history, right? That you just described to a T, like what I would describe as the baton pass. It's like, okay, from the older generation to the younger generation, like what are the traditions, and how can we redefine that? And if you are familiar with Chase Oaks, that's what happened with Gene Getz, our founding pastor, and Jeff Jones, our senior pastor today. And there was a little baton pass. And in my mind, I know that there are a lot of things that were a part of our church, just even the name of the church, that were parts of who we were in the DNA. And a lot of those things went through a kind of a transformation. And that was a conscientious effort of what I would say Gene's vision and his wisdom from an older generation, say, you know what, if this is going to be meaningful for the next generation, they have to be able to have a voice in it, to be able to reform it, to make it theirs, right? And so we've been talking about this issue from the context of the younger generation, like how do we deal that when it comes to the older generation? But if there are people who are listening who are in that older generation, and that would, I mean, we're maybe a little bit in that range too, Matt. Like we could be in that older generation a little bit, right? Where we have to be thinking about the next generation, right? Thinking about how do we hand the baton over and allow the next generation of leaders to redefine the things that we do in ways that are meaningful for them, so that they can carry those core principles forward, right? So I think just to add that on there, it wasn't part of the original question, but that's a bonus thrown for free kind of thing. A little bit of church ministry, right?
I think that's really insightful, because I do think there's two sides to that. And I think anybody who's on that older side, or considered in that older generation like you are, I think it is a realistic I think it's a realistic concern that it's such a common thing, that older generation having that sense of a lack of control, a new normal. You're transitioning into a new phase, not because you're just like you're super ancient or something, but that it's a new phase of you're not owning every aspect that you used to. You don't have control or authority over simple things like dishes or decor or timing of things or activities, like you said. There is that letting go, and that's just a difficult transition represented in this like small thing of holidays. And then of course the younger perspective that we discussed earlier. But that whole concept of the transition, regardless of really how old you are, it's an experience of transition, loss of control, loss of
everyone in different ways, for sure. Yeah. Good.
All right, we'll keep this going a little bit. We'll keep it in the same theme with this maybe a younger perspective, but not necessarily. So this next question: how do I navigate the holidays as a single person when it feels like everyone around me is married, has kids, or has family to be with? Which I think, I'm not single, but what I hear commonly is that this time of year, the expectation or just the design of all these activities and gatherings is for the family or couples, things like that. And so I hear this, it's some form of this question quite a bit. So this is definitely common, for sure.
Yeah. Actually, Dana, my wife, and I were just talking about that today, because we were trying to figure out what we're going to do, picking up food, what kind of meal to prepare and stuff like that. And we were talking about if we're going to invite a friend of ours who is single. She lost her husband a couple of years ago and is just living by herself. And so we were literally just thinking about this earlier this morning. So I'll talk about it from two perspectives. One from the person who is single, and then from the perspective of those who are like that, have families and have people who are single in your sphere. So from the perspective of the person who is single, so I'm gonna lean hard on this whole 3 structure model of detach, harmonize, and disrupt. Lean, because you can actually apply it here. And I would probably, if I was talking to somebody in this situation, I would use the same concept, because you could choose, and it would be completely fine to choose the detach route, which would mean really removing yourself from a lot of trigger points. So it can be a painful period of time, and you can see and observe a lot of things around you that will probably be very painful for you, and just reminiscent of just how maybe there are things that are not the way that you want in life. And so, I've heard of people that will simply plan a trip, out of town trip, and go somewhere just to keep themselves active and doing something, engaged in something else while that's going on. And so it's a way to just simply keep yourself occupied, and so you're not in a position where that day comes and you're just kind of in a house by yourself and it can get kind of lonely and a little bit dark and that kind of thing. And so just finding ways to detach yourself from that space and reset yourself in another space that has a lot more active engagement for you. And so you can even be thinking about that now, about creatively, how do I book? I actually remember I was talking to a gentleman who was in this situation. I was like, look, the day's coming, like it was like a month away. And like, let's go ahead and think about it now. What are you going to do that day? I want you to be able to think of like maybe 3 friends of yours that you can probably plan something with. Be thinking about maybe activity that you can do, or just some things. And so he had a plan. He had a plan well in advance that day of what he was going to do. And the trick was that when the day approached, to stick with the plan, because the day of, it can get pretty difficult to actually follow through, because you may become like lethargic or kind of get a little bit despondent. So the deal was, hey, keep yourself accountable. You have the plan, put it in place, go and do it. Even if you don't feel like it, get out of bed, go and do it. Right. So that would be the detached model, I think, where you're just removing yourself and resetting yourself in a different place. The harmonize is the one that, the one Dan and I were thinking of, which was going to be, hey, you can be included in the traditions and the participation of that day with other people, other families that may include you into this. And so we're thinking of this friend of ours who we're going to invite, she's going to be by herself, we think. And so we'll invite her in. And so she knows that this is not her family per se, but we're harmonizing a little bit by saying, okay, well, we want to include you to at least create some fellowship here, some semblance of relationship and care and and friendship. And so that's a harmonized approach where you can like, hey, yeah, I'll take an invitation if someone's going to invite me to their dinner. That'll help make it feel a little bit better, right? The last one to disrupt, the one that's most difficult, if I can put it this way, I think you can still do his other two, but the disrupt one kind of digs a little bit more into the internal conflict. So while the other examples that we had where it's like we're going to try and engage the conflict of other people, this one is more like I'm going to try and dig into some of the conflict within myself. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but I think, just this is me as a therapist, this is the way I'm going to think. But when there is internal conflict, when there's pain, when there is suffering, there's reasons to kind of dig into it, lean into the pain a little bit, and start learning and observing, like, what is that about? Like, and what is it telling you? And take an opportunity to understand, like, this place that God has you in your life, like what area of growth or what things that are you learning in this space, because it's probably one of the most pointed and pressurized places of pain, where that might be a pain that kind of runs underneath the surface throughout the duration of the rest of the year. On holidays like this, it becomes accentuated. And so for me as a therapist, I'm thinking, okay, that's where you can actually move into it and learn and observe a lot about, well, how do I feel about singleness, right? How do I feel about my relationships, and how do I feel about my position, and how do I even feel about my relationship with God and all that kind of stuff? And how do I reconcile those things? There's a lot of good questions in there, right? Obviously much more difficult work. I'm not suggesting that everyone just kind of dive into that and just kind of like ruminate in that kind of stuff. But for those who are prepared for that, who are in a stage of life when they are ready to kind of wrestle with those things, that is a viable option as well. So that's kind of the way I would break it down. Does it make sense?
Okay. It does. And I think the detach option is something that can be chosen as something that is more broadly helpful, because I think the first two scenarios that you laid out is to basically get through a particular day or a gathering. But if you choose the disrupt option and you see, okay, how can I solve this at least in part internally? That's helpful to survive the entire season.
Yeah.
Where you're just walking around and you're inundated with messaging and imagery and expectations and that kind of thing. One way that you can work to kind of overcome that or cope with that is to do some of that internal work with yourself, and then obviously with the Lord, and that can equip you to endure the length of the entire season, not just Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, but that whole span.
Yeah. In fact, as I think about it right now, um, some you know this, and some people listening to this who know me know this, but like 5 years ago, we lost one of our kids. So I remember the following Thanksgiving was really, really hard for us. In fact, and
Mhm.
so what we did was we did the detach. So we purposefully planned that we would not be at home. We would not be with the family tradition that we're used to, because it would be all very difficult for us to just be in that space. So this is a little bit different because obviously the questioners, is thinking about with regard to singleness. But let's just talk about in the general blanket of pain, right? When
Yeah.
this is going to be a painful season, and that's what it was for us. We planned a trip to the Northeast, and we spent actually Thanksgiving in transit. I think between like Boston and DC on a train, and literally like Thanksgiving night we were like on a train. It was like it was great to travel because there's no one traveling at that time. But
Yeah.
we planned it that way because we didn't want to be in that space, and so we purposefully detached from it, so that we could just get ourselves a little breathing room from that painful space, and just kind of reset. But at the same time, as you just said, like if it's that painful, we're not going to just simply be able to get away from it. We were also doing a lot of disrupting too. I remember that entire that day when we're in transit on Thanksgiving Day, both my wife and I were thinking through, like, man, like, how do we reconcile, like, this is a very different season, like this time last year was very different
Yeah.
for us, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of going on where, like, okay, if you're ready, or if you just simply have no choice, but you can push into and lean into some of that pain and really wrestle with God in a way that I think is healing too. And so I want to just highlight that those are options, multiple options in which you can also do them at the same time, even. But be intentional, be thinking that
Yeah.
these are all options that are possible, right?
Yeah. And I think that's helpful to identify that, um, that this particular question is basically saying this season is hard because I'm single. But in reality, what you're addressing is, it doesn't matter why it's hard exactly, but if it's
Right.
hard, you can still employ these different types of approaches.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing, about your loss, and that personal example. I think that always rings really true, and appreciate you
Yeah,
peeling.
yeah, for sure. I mean, as we're talking about it, I realize that we've talked a lot about like family tension, but this question moves a little bit into like into loss. And in fact, if we tag the last question with, the older generation who really wants the traditions to look a certain way, I think you kind of alluded to it, but I think we have a hard time letting go of the way we want to have things done,
Mhm.
because there's an overall sense of loss. Like, particularly, I think in the older we get, the more control we're losing, and so there's loss strewn throughout the years. As we get older, there's just more and more loss. I mean, the you can't live long on this earth without experiencing loss in that way. And so I think we're now introducing maybe some concepts here of like, okay, but beyond the tension of strained family relationships, there's an element here of just, we all have to kind of acknowledge that this is also a painful time because there is loss and heartache and suffering for a lot of people in different ways. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you. I thank you for that. I think that's, well, hopefully some practical steps for people to take, or at least some ideas to consider.
Yep.
We'll keep it going with the difficulty, emotional difficulty of the season. This next question says, this is my first holiday season being divorced. I anticipate the next month and a half will just be terrible. Am I wrong? How can I make it better? How would you address that?
Yeah, this is very similar to the last one because it's a pain and a loss in a different way. There are layers to this one too, because for a lot of people, it's not just loss of the marriage or the relationship; it's potentially loss of that time with kids too.
Mhm.
Because after divorce, a lot of people, just because of the way the divorce decrees are set up, who gets the kids for what holidays and things like that, or when. I mean, someone's going to be, there's going to be a point in time when you're going to be by yourself, and that's going to be hard. And the fact that the example I gave you before with a client where I was like, hey, we know this day's coming, let's plan for that. Yeah, he was fresh off a divorce, and he had a young child, and so we were thinking of, okay, like, let's not be in a big house by yourself kind of thing on that day. So that's first, just to acknowledge that it anticipating that it's going to be hard, and there's no way around that. I mean, this is for some people the first. I mean, the year first is always hard because you're contextualizing every experience that you have with what was life like the year before, right? And so even if you're like months removed from like where the divorce, when the divorce happened was like maybe a months ago, this is potentially the very first Thanksgiving where we don't have these things, right? And so there's a lot of triggering memories about, hey, this used to be the case. This used to be what we do. This used to be all this stuff, right? And so the year first, whether Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever, it's just going to be a little bit of a sharp pain at first. And so let's just kind of acknowledge that's a thing. I think then it goes back to the same kind of thing we talked about last time, which is, okay, you have some options here of how you want to handle that. Obviously first we're legitimizing and validating that's a thing. So you can now say, okay, do I want to try to keep myself as occupied as possible? Be back with my family of origin, maybe. And that may have its own kind of difficulties, but there are some ways in which you can reset yourself a little bit. And then, maybe be able to get into a position where you can harmonize. I know some divorced husband and wife will plan like, okay, for the sake of the kids, like, can we have a meal together? And this gets back into what we were talking about before. There's obviously a strained relationship when it comes to divorce, but there are some times in which maybe the divorce is amicable enough where you can buck up for like a dinner, right? And show up at a neutral site, like go show up at a Luby's or something like that. We're like, hey, we're all going to get together and we're just going to have a meal together and be able to do that. There are ways in which you can kind of harmonize enough to be able to get some of those things there. So that's definitely another option as well. So yeah, I would kind of follow the same cadence and structure as we did in the last question with those three options. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me throw in this alternative scenario. I don't know what the question would be, but I'm thinking, what advice would you have for blended families? Mm-hmm. So say someone that's listening and they're, they've step kids, they're a step parent, and you're dealing with these other layers of, there are exes that are involved, or the kids might be split. Is there anything that a step parent or blended families in general would need to be aware of, or any
I mean, there are a number of factors and variables in there. I mean, if we're assuming that this is like first Thanksgiving where there's blended family, another factor to consider is the age of the kids. I mean, particularly if you're dealing with preteens and teens and you're in a blended family situation and it's the first Thanksgiving, you want to handle that with as gentle kid gloves as possible. Because I mean, there's just a lot of emotions and feelings going on for a teen in general, that period. But when you're talking about blended family and with preteens and teens involved, that's even like exponentially more difficult. So if you're the parent and step parent in here, if it's me, I would really, really try to look at this holiday as an experience that you're trying to craft around the kids and meet them where they're at. Like, you may have your own hopes and vision of what a Thanksgiving should look like for your family. And maybe if it's a blended family, hey, we're a family. I want us to be a family together. Like, you got to really be paying attention to how the kids are processing it. And they may not be fully ready to be experiencing it that way. Mm-hmm. And so first and foremost, as the parents, as the adults in the room kind of thing, I would be thinking about like, okay, where are they at? And how can we create it to where we can create an environment that feels like a reasonable step for them to engage in maybe a new tradition or new experience, but also give them a lot of room to say, hey, this isn't going to feel and doesn't have to feel like a happy family unit right now, right? It's okay to create that space for them to kind of vacillate around there. I think that will go a long way to building trust and rapport in a relationship with amongst the step kids, step parents, and that kind of thing. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that really you got to pull a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus towards the kids in this situation, to be able to make that happen. So that means you inherently have to sacrifice a lot of your own wants for that period and that day itself. So that's just maybe one aspect. I mean, we can probably spend an entire podcast on just that one alone, but that's the first one that comes to my mind. One that's probably most often overlooked for a lot of families that are blended.
Okay. Let me stick one more follow-up question with divorce. So you mentioned the kids, you're highlighting the kids. What about adult children of divorce? And maybe this holiday season is something that's newer for them. Maybe it's not the first one exactly, but it's still just like a weird time. What advice would you have? And it's not necessarily, the scenario I'm thinking is not necessarily navigating a particular environment, but meaning like, dinner with, like, I need to be here with my mom and then here with my dad, but just like the pain of this loss. Like, I had all these years of these great holiday experiences, or just my childhood with my parents married, and now they're split, and I'm 30, and I don't know what to, like, this is awful. Like, is there, whether it's just encouragement or anything to say to that particular person as they just try to deal with the pain and loss of parental split, but I'm an adult now?
Yeah. So when I was referring to before about the I guess the nature and the cycle of loss, like the older you get, the more accustomed and the more familiarized you are with loss, because there's more things to lose, but the nature of loss in my mind is that loss done well, when you allow yourself to kind of press into it and really observe, in this situation, if it's an adult child, 30-year-old child, of divorced parents, and this is like, okay, like the family, we're not doing Thanksgiving, Christmas together again because mom and dad are separated now. That's loss. There is a lot of loss for that. I mean, you can even say for like a 22-year-old, or like there's kind of a bit of a trauma. I'll say maybe a small T trauma of like, hey, this is just like this change. Where did this come from? Like, and I'm having a hard time getting my head wrapped around it. My heart, I get it happened, but my heart's just not there, right? So there's some grace in giving yourself the space to say, okay, I'm having a hard time digesting it. Be patient with yourself. That's okay. That's normal. Okay. There's no real preparedness for it, but when the day comes, it's going to hit you again. And so just kind of give yourself space to acknowledge that. But I think going back to the overall kind of like nature of loss, if you allow yourself to do that and to observe, okay, these are things I wish that I had, that I treasured, that I valued, and I don't have. And there's pain and there's sadness and there's reason to mourn and lament that, right? Mm-hmm. But if you do that well, what happens is you also begin to allow yourself the space and the potential for gain, like to reform and to begin to re-envision what does this look like now? And so that could mean moving into, okay, well, I don't have that, but what does Thanksgiving, what do these family traditions, what does my family look like now? If I'm married and have kids, like begin to start re-envisioning, like, what can life look like? And if you can do that well, that allows you to really enjoy the forward movement as well. And so I always kind of think of loss and gain as kind of equal parts of the life cycle, that if we don't allow ourselves to do loss, then we kind of limit ourselves to the ability to really live into gain as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm hearing you that that there are situations in this particular context we're talking about. I'm an adult and my parents have been recently divorced, and that is something that is painful and is allowed to, and probably, I think what you're saying, in healthy ways, lament that, mourn that, grieve that. That's significant loss. That is painful. It needs its due time to endure, like to not just rush through that or gloss over that. There is something to be said for experiencing.
Don't rush it. Let yourself go through it.
And you need it to go through that. that process, which may take time and different amounts of time for different people for different
Yeah.
things, right? But then you're also then saying, but when it is time, that there is an opportunity, not just for, for it to numb out or scar tissue to build up over that wound, but to reform and to design, what does the future look like now that the old has gone? What does the new now look like? And so I appreciate that imagery of loss and gain being equal partners, that yes, there is loss, but it doesn't need to be exclusively loss,
right?
That there is opportunity for gain and reformation on the other side of that that mountain.
And I would even say, like, it's like a prerequisite. I think you have to allow yourself the space to go through it if you're going to be able to get to the gain. Like, if you shortchange yourself on that part, then you shortchange yourself on the gain. And maybe to kind of contextualize even more, you may feel like, especially if you're talking about, elderly parents, if you're an adult child and this is your position with your parents, they may be thinking, hey, this has been like years coming, and they may be in a different mental place and emotional space, and they're not grieving it in the same way at all. And they may be thinking like, hey, why are you grieving it? Or maybe wanting you to kind of say, hey, let's be happy. And, I get that. You're going to hear that from a lot of people. Like, what's the big deal? That's why I'm telling you, like, from me, give yourself the space. You may not feel like it's legitimized by other people. People may be thinking you shouldn't be feeling that way, or want you to move fast or get over it, that kind of thing. Don't do that. Like, allow yourself that space, because you'll be able to then get to the other side and really be able to live life into well at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think we could probably keep going with 100 other questions that I could muster up, but this has been really, really helpful, Lee. And I think there's a chance that we'll do more of these again. So we may have an opportunity to collect more questions along the way that won't be necessarily holiday specific, but hopefully people will, be enticed to ask a therapist a question, and they won't be on the clock for it, which would be would be great.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. I guess we'll see what the response is to this particular video, and if we engage in this again. But thanks so much for your time. I do think that it will end up being really helpful to a lot of people. So if you're watching this video and it was in fact helpful to you, please share it with someone that you think might benefit from it, or just share it to your broader social media community, and go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It does help us out, and hopefully to do more videos like this. So thanks for watching, and happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate being here.
You got it, Lee. Thank you.